They say you never really know someone until you share an inheritance with them. The true colors that emerge when money and possessions enter the picture can transform even the closest family into strangers. I learned this lesson the hard way when my grandmother Eleanor passed away last month. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The whispers started the moment I walked into the room. I could feel their eyes on me, like pinpricks against my skin. My step-grandmother Patricia sat perched at the head of the table in Eleanor's dining room, fingers adorned with my grandmother's jewelry already. Her perfectly highlighted hair caught the light from the chandelier, the one my grandfather had installed as a gift for my grandmother on their 30th wedding anniversary. Beside her, my step-aunt Diane and step-uncle Robert exchanged knowing glances, barely acknowledging my presence. Well, look who decided to show up after all, Patricia said, her voice dripping with sweetness that never reached her eyes. We weren't sure you'd bother coming, Emma, considering how distant you've been. I clutched my daughter Lily's hand tighter as we found the only 2 empty chairs at the far end of the table. Lily, only 12 years old but wise beyond. Her years squeezed back reassuringly. She was the only reason I had found the strength to come today. The mahogany dining table where we sat had been in the Reynolds family for 4 generations. I remembered Sunday dinners here, the laughter, the stories. Now it felt like a battlefield, with invisible lines drawn between real family and outsiders. According to Patricia, my step-grandmother of 15 years, I belonged firmly in the latter category. How's that little apartment of yours in the city? Diane asked with feigned interest, adjusting her designer watch. Still working at that. Craft store, is it? It's an art gallery, I corrected quietly, though I knew it didn't matter. They'd already decided who I was years ago. The disappointment. The one who left Oak Ridge for the city. The one who chose passion over practicality. Robert snorted. Well, at least you showed up for the reading, though I'm not sure why you bothered. What they didn't say, but what hung in the air between us, was their shared belief that I had abandoned Eleanor, that I hadn't cared enough, that I didn't deserve to be here. The truth was much more complicated than they could ever understand. Mom belonged here, Lily whispered fiercely, her eyes, so like my grandmother's, flashing with a protective indignation that made my heart swell. Grandma Eleanor always said so. Patricia's lips thinned at my daughter's words. She'd never liked Lily, perhaps because my grandmother had adored her from the moment she was born. Perhaps because Lily had been the only one brave enough to challenge Patricia's carefully constructed narrative of our family. The ornate grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 3 times, its deep resonance filling the awkward silence. Right on cue, Michael Bennett, my grandmother's attorney, entered the room carrying a leather portfolio. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-40s, with kind eyes that seemed out of place in the tension-filled room. "Thank you all for coming," he said, taking a seat at the other end of the table. "I know this is a difficult time, but Mrs. Reynolds was very specific about her wishes." Patricia straightened, her hand reaching to touch the pearl necklace at her throat. My grandmother's pearls. Well, let's not drag this out unnecessarily. We all have arrangements to make. By arrangements, I knew she meant plans for the house. She'd made no secret of her intention to sell the Victorian home my grandparents had lovingly restored together over decades. The home where I'd spent every summer of my childhood. The home where my mother had grown up before her life was cut, tragically short. "Of course," Michael replied, his tone professional but somehow gentler when his gaze briefly met mine. "Before I begin, Mrs. Reynolds requested that I play this." He placed a small digital recorder on the table and pressed play. My breath caught in my throat at the sound of Eleanor's voice, still strong despite her illness. "If you're listening to this, then I've finally stopped fighting. Stubborn till the end, just as Henry always said. A soft chuckle, so achingly familiar it made my eyes sting. I've lived a long life, filled with more joy than sorrow, and for that I am grateful. But I've also made mistakes. I've allowed certain truths to remain unspoken out of a desire for peace. Today, that ends. Patricia shifted uncomfortably, exchanging a look with Robert that I couldn't quite interpret. To my family gathered here today, what matters most in this life isn't what we accumulate, but the love we share and the integrity with which we live. Remember that as Michael reads my final wishes. The recording ended, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. I felt Lily's hand find mine beneath the table again, her small fingers intertwining with my own. In that moment, I was intensely grateful for her steadiness, her unwavering presence when everything else felt so uncertain. Michael cleared his throat and opened the portfolio. I'll now read the last will and testament of Eleanor Margaret Reynolds. What followed was exactly what Patricia and her children had expected, at first. Small bequests to distant relatives and longtime friends, charitable donations to the local library and historical society. But as Michael continued reading, something in his voice changed, a subtle shift that made me look up from the spot on the table I'd been staring at. And now, to the matter of my primary estate, including the house at 412 Maple Street, all its contents, and the surrounding property. Patricia leaned forward, her expression triumphant, already reaching for Robert's hand in celebration. I leave everything to my granddaughter, Emma Claire Reynolds, and her daughter, Lily Ann Reynolds. The room froze. Patricia's hand remained suspended in midair, her mouth slightly open. Diane dropped her pen with a clatter. Robert's face flushed an alarming shade of red. "This can't be right," Patricia finally managed, her voice high and tight. "There must be some mistake." Michael looked up from the document, his expression impassive. "There's no mistake, Mrs. Walker. Mrs. Reynolds amended her will 6 months ago. Everything was in order, with 2 witnesses present." 6 months ago? Patricia's voice rose sharply. She was already ill then. She wasn't thinking clearly. This is elder abuse. I sat there, stunned into silence. The house? Everything? It made no sense. The last real conversation I'd had with my grandmother had been almost 2 years ago, before Patricia had intervened, claiming I was upsetting Eleanor with city talk. After that, my calls went unanswered. My letters were returned. The few times I'd tried to visit, Patricia insisted Eleanor was too tired for company. Eventually, reluctantly, I'd stopped trying. Something I now regretted with every fiber of my being. Furthermore, Michael continued, raising his voice slightly to be heard over Patricia's protests, Mrs. Reynolds left specific instructions that a collection of boxes in the attic labeled "For Emma" are to be given directly to Ms. Reynolds immediately, following this reading. "Boxes?" Diane scoffed. "What boxes? We've been through that entire house. There's nothing in the attic but old Christmas decorations and mothballed linens." Michael simply looked at me. "Mrs. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Reynolds was quite clear. The boxes are behind the false wall in the east corner of the attic. False wall? My mind raced back to childhood games of hide and seek, to a particular corner of the attic where the floorboards sounded different, where the wallpaper pattern didn't quite match. A secret only Eleanor, my mother, and I had known about. This is absurd. Patricia stood now, her carefully composed facade crumbling. Emma hasn't been part of this family for years. She abandoned Eleanor when she needed her most. She doesn't deserve any of this. Robert stood too, his face still flushed with anger. We're contesting this. Eleanor wasn't in her right mind. Emma manipulated her, took advantage of her condition. I finally found my voice, though it came out quieter than I intended. I haven't even spoken to Grandma in almost 2 years. How could I have manipulated her? Oh, please, Diane rolled her eyes. We all know you've always been her favorite. Poor little Emma, orphaned so young, the spitting image of her precious daughter Caroline. Eleanor could never see past that. To who you really are, a selfish, ungrateful. That's enough. Lily's voice cut through the tension, startlingly mature for her 12 years. My mom tried to see Grandma Eleanor for months. You're the ones who kept them apart. Patricia's eyes narrowed dangerously. Children should be seen and not heard, Lily. This doesn't concern you. Actually, Michael interjected, as a beneficiary, it very much concerns her. He turned to me. Ms. Reynolds, would you like to examine the boxes now? Mrs. Reynolds was quite insistent that you do so immediately. In a daze, I nodded. As we stood to leave, Patricia stepped into my path, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for my ears. This isn't over, Emma. That house has been my home for 15 years. I won't let you take it from me. I met her gaze steadily, finding strength I didn't know I possessed. It was never yours to begin with, Patricia. She recoiled as if I'd slapped her. Behind me, I heard Robert mutter something about trash from the city, but I didn't turn around. With Lily's hand firmly in mine and Michael leading the way, we climbed the familiar stairs to the attic, leaving the angry murmurs behind us. The attic was just as I remembered. Sloped ceilings, dormer windows letting in dusty beams of afternoon light, the scent of cedar and old books. Michael stayed by the stairs, giving us space as I moved instinctively toward the east corner, Lily following curiously. Mom, what are we looking for? I ran my fingers along the wainscoting, feeling for the small notch that had delighted me as a child. A secret, sweetheart. One your great-grandmother wanted us to find. My fingers found the groove, and with a gentle push, a section of the wall swung inward with a creak of disused hinges. Behind it, stacked neatly, were 3 wooden boxes of varying sizes. Each bore a simple label in my grandmother's elegant handwriting. For Emma. With trembling hands, I lifted the smallest box first and placed it on an old trunk nearby. Lily watched, wide-eyed, as I gently lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a familiar locket, silver, heart-shaped, with an intricate floral design. My mother's locket. The one she'd been wearing the day of the accident. The one I thought had been buried with her. Mom? Lily's voice seemed to come from far away. Are you okay? I wasn't. The room swam before me, memories flooding back with such intensity I had to grip the trunk for support. Michael approached cautiously, concern etched on his face. Ms. Reynolds? Mrs. Reynolds left this for you as well. He handed me an envelope, my name written in my grandmother's distinctive script. Inside was a single sheet of paper, dated 6 months earlier. My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then I've finally found the courage to tell the truth, even if only after I'm gone. The boxes contain the evidence you'll need: letters, photographs, documents, and your mother's journal. Patricia has lied to us both for years. She kept your letters from me, told me you wanted nothing to do with an old woman and her antiquated ways. By the time Helen told me what was happening, my illness had progressed too far for me to reach out to you myself. The truth about your mother's accident is in these boxes. It wasn't your fault, my darling girl. It never was. Patricia knew this, has always known this, yet she allowed you to carry that burden. Perhaps worst of all, she used it to drive a wedge between us when I needed you most. I know this will be painful, but you deserve to know the truth. You deserve to be free of the guilt you've carried for too long. With all my love, Grandma Eleanor. The letter slipped from my fingers, floating to the dusty floor like a fallen leaf. Lily picked it up, her eyes scanning the words, her young face solemn with understanding beyond her years. Mom, she said softly, we need to open the other boxes. From below, we could hear Patricia's voice, shrill with indignation, demanding to know what was taking so long. But up here, in this hidden corner of my childhood, time seemed to stand still as I faced the prospect of a truth I wasn't sure I was ready for. With a deep breath, I reached for the second box, larger and heavier than the first. Whatever secrets it contained, Eleanor had wanted me to find them. After 15 years of carrying the weight of my mother's death, perhaps it was finally time to learn what really happened that rainy night on Oak Ridge Bridge. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. The second box contained exactly what Eleanor's letter had promised: a leather-bound journal with my mother's name embossed on the cover, a stack of letters tied with blue ribbon, my letters to Eleanor, unopened, and a manila envelope labeled Police Report, Caroline Reynolds. I stared at the envelope, my heart hammering in my chest. The official report on my mother's accident, the one I'd been too devastated to read at 17, the one Patricia had later told me was best left in the past. "Do you want me to leave?" Michael asked quietly from his position by the stairs. I'd almost forgotten he was there. "No," I said, surprising myself. "Please stay. I might need a legal perspective on this." Lily sat beside me on the old trunk, her shoulder pressed against mine in silent support as I opened the envelope with unsteady fingers. The report was clinical, detached, written in the impersonal language of law enforcement. Single vehicle accident, rainy conditions, bridge railing failure. But as I read further, details emerged that contradicted everything I'd been told for 15 years. Witness statement from Helen Davis, housekeeper. Mrs. Reynolds was upset after the argument. She said she needed to find Emma immediately. Toxicology report, negative for alcohol. Contrary to Patricia's whispered insinuations that my mother had been drinking that night. Vehicle inspection notes. Brake line appears to have been recently compromised. Evidence of tampering cannot be ruled out. Tampered brakes? My vision blurred, the typed words swimming before me. All these years, I'd carried the crushing belief that my mother had died looking for me after our fight. That if I hadn't stormed out that night over something so trivial, my desire to attend art school instead of the business program my step-grandfather favored, she would still be alive. "There's more," Lily whispered, gently taking the report from my hands and pointing to a section near the end. Officer's note. Husband Henry Reynolds requested further investigation into vehicle tampering. Case referred to Detective Wilson. No follow-up found. My grandfather had suspected foul play. He'd asked for an investigation, but somehow it had never happened. He'd died of a heart attack just 6 months after my mother, never knowing the truth. With growing dread, I turned to my mother's journal, flipping to the last entries. April 3rd, 2008. Patricia overheard Henry discussing the changes to his will today. He intends to place the majority of the estate in trust for Emma's education and future, with Caroline and me as trustees. Patricia was livid. I heard her on the phone later, telling someone that the child won't get a penny if I have my way. I have to talk to Henry about this. I don't trust her. April 5th, 2008. Things are tense in the house. Patricia's children arrived yesterday supposedly for a visit, but I suspect it's a show of force. Robert cornered me in the garden, suggested that Emma might be happier in a boarding school environment. When I refused, he said something that felt like a threat. "Accidents happen to stubborn people, Caroline. Remember that." April 7th, 2008. Emma and I are leaving tomorrow. I've made arrangements with my old college roommate in Portland. We'll stay with her until I can sort this out. I've told no one except Helen, who's promised to cover for us until we're safely away. I hate hiding things from Henry, but Patricia is always hovering around him, monitoring his calls, his medication. I'll call him once we're on the road. I haven't told Emma yet. She's still upset about our argument the other night. She doesn't understand the danger we're in. I only pray I'm not too late, the last entry, written the day before she died. The day I'd run out of the house after our fight, spending hours at the lake to clear my head, returning only to find police cars in the driveway and my world shattered forever. She'd been trying to save me, not coming to scold me or bring me home in disgrace, as Patricia had suggested. She'd been coming to warn me, to take me away from the danger she'd sensed circling our family. "Mom?" Lily's voice broke through the roaring in my ears. "There's one more box." The third box was the largest, an old hat box with faded flowers on the lid. Inside were photographs I'd never seen. My grandfather meeting with his lawyer shortly before his death, documents spread between them. Close-ups of these documents, showing what appeared to be draft versions of a will very different from the one that had eventually been read, the one that had left Patricia in control of everything until Eleanor turned 75. And most damning of all, a series of photographs of the family car taken in the garage the day before my mother's accident. Robert, in dark clothing, lying on his back beneath the vehicle. A close-up of hands working on what could only be the brake line. "Who took these?" I whispered, horrified. Michael stepped closer, examining the photos. Based on the angle, I'd say someone who was hiding in the garden shed, looking through the side window of the garage. The final item in the box was a letter, in an unfamiliar handwriting. "Eleanor, I should have given you these years ago, but I was afraid. After what happened to Caroline, and then Henry so soon after, I couldn't be sure they wouldn't come for me next. I've kept these hidden all this time, waiting for the right moment. When you told me about your diagnosis, I knew I couldn't take these to my grave. You deserved to know what really happened to your daughter, what that woman and her son did to your family. I took these photos the day before Caroline died. I'd been suspicious for weeks, ever since I overheard Robert threatening her in the garden. I didn't know what he was planning, only that it was something terrible. I never imagined he would go this far. By the time I developed the film, it was too late. Caroline was gone, and you were too devastated to hear this. Then when Henry started asking questions, he suddenly had a heart attack. It seemed too convenient. Patricia has controlled everything since then. Your home, your finances, even your relationship with Emma. She's kept that poor girl away with her lies, made her believe she was somehow responsible for her mother's death. I'm an old woman now, and I've carried this burden too long. Do what you must with this information. Find Emma. Tell her the truth. Make this right before it's too late. With deepest regrets for my silence, Helen Davis. I remembered Helen, quiet, observant, always kind to me when Patricia wasn't looking. She'd retired shortly after my grandfather died, or so I'd been told. Now, I wondered if she'd been forced out to keep her silent. "This is," Michael began, his professional demeanor cracking as he studied the photos. "This is evidence of premeditated murder and the subsequent cover-up." "They killed my mother," I said, the words feeling strange and hollow in my mouth, "and my grandfather. And they've been living in this house, spending their money, all while making me believe I was responsible." Michael's expression was grim. "These documents suggest your grandfather was changing his will to protect you and your mother, but after their deaths, a different will was presented, one that gave Patricia control. Which means the will that put Patricia in charge of everything was probably forged," I concluded, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. Lily, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "That's why Grandma Eleanor changed her will 6 months ago. She found out the truth and wanted to make sure we got everything back." A commotion from downstairs interrupted us, raised voices, the sound of breaking glass. Michael moved quickly to the attic door, peering down the stairs. "It sounds like Patricia and her children are searching the house," he said quietly. "We should secure these documents immediately." I nodded, gathering everything back into the boxes. "Can we prove any of this after so many years?" Michael's expression was thoughtful. the statute of limitations doesn't apply to murder. And with this evidence, the photos, the police report that mentions tampering, your mother's journal entries establishing motive, there's certainly enough to warrant a new investigation. More crashes from below, followed by Patricia's shrill voice. "Find those boxes. I don't care what you have to break." "We need to leave," I said, suddenly fearful. "Now." Michael nodded, taking the largest box while I gathered the other. 2. Lily pressed close to my side as we descended the back stairs that led to the kitchen. Another childhood secret, a servant's passage rarely used anymore. We slipped out through the garden door just as I heard Patricia's voice in the main hallway, demanding that someone check the attic again. My car was parked on the street, partially hidden by a large oak tree. Michael helped us load the boxes into the trunk, then handed me his business card. "Go directly to the police station," he advised in a low voice. "Ask for Chief Warner. He's been in Oak Ridge for decades. He would have known your mother and grandfather. Show him everything. I'll handle things here and meet you there as soon as I can." "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "For everything." He smiled slightly. "I was quite fond of your grandmother. She knew exactly what she was doing with that will reading today. She wanted the truth to come out, with witnesses present." As Lily and I drove away from the house that should have been our home all these years, I glanced in the rearview mirror to see Patricia standing on the porch, her face contorted with rage as she watched us leave. For the first time in 15 years, the weight of guilt that had been my constant companion began to lift. My mother's death wasn't my fault. She had been trying to protect me from the very people who had spent years convincing me I was to blame. "Mom?" Lily's voice was small beside me. "Are we going to be okay?" I reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. "Yes, sweetheart. For the first time in a very long time, I think we are." Chief Warner was exactly as Michael had described, a veteran, officer with deep roots in Oak Ridge and a memory that stretched back decades. His office was small but tidy, with fishing trophies lining one wall and faded photographs of several generations of police officers on another. He listened without interruption as I laid out the story, his weathered face growing increasingly grave as I showed him the contents of Eleanor's boxes. When I finished, the silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the ticking of an old clock on his desk. "I remember that night," he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "I was a deputy then. I always thought something didn't add up, but the investigation was taken over by county detectives. When they closed the case, calling it a tragic accident." He shook his head. "Henry, your grandfather. He kept pushing, asking questions. Then he was gone too, and it all just stopped." "So you believe us?" Lily asked, perched on the edge of her chair. Chief Warner smiled at her, the expression softening his stern features. "Young lady, I've been a cop for 40 years. I know evidence when I see it." He turned back to me. "This won't be easy or quick. We're talking about reopening a 15-year-old case. There will be questions about why these photos weren't turned over sooner, why Helen Davis kept quiet all these years." "She was afraid," I said softly, remembering the letter. "After what happened to my mother and grandfather." He nodded grimly. "Fear is a powerful silencer, but the truth has a way of surfacing, even after all this time." He gathered the documents carefully. "I'll need to keep these, make copies, start building a case. In the meantime, where will you stay?" "Not at the house, I hope?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't thought that far ahead. We have a hotel room in town for tonight. After that, I'm not sure." "Stay there for now," he advised. "Given what we're dealing with, I'd feel better knowing you're somewhere Patricia and her children can't easily find you." A knock at the door interrupted us. Michael stood there looking slightly disheveled but otherwise unharmed. "Sorry I'm late. Things got a bit heated at the yaw." House after you left. Chief Warner waved him in. Mr. Bennett, I was just telling Ms. Reynolds that she should avoid the house for the time being. Michael nodded in agreement. Absolutely. In fact, I've already filed an emergency injunction preventing Patricia or her children from removing anything from the property until the will contest is resolved. He turned to me. Which, given what we've discovered today, may become the least of their concerns. The implications of what was happening began to sink in. Patricia, Robert, and Diane might soon face murder charges. The life they'd built on stolen property and stolen lives was crumbling around them. What happens now? I asked, feeling suddenly exhausted by the day's revelations. Now, Chief Warner said, standing, I make some calls to the district attorney and the state police. This isn't something our small department can handle alone. You go back to your hotel, get some rest, and stay safe. He hesitated, then added, And Ms. Reynolds? For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Your mother was a fine woman. She deserved better than this. As we left the police station, the sun was setting over Oak Ridge, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded me painfully of evenings spent on Eleanor's porch swing, listening to her stories of the past. How much of what I thought I knew about my family had been filtered through Patricia's lies? Mom? Lily's voice broke into my thoughts as we drove toward the hotel. Do you think we'll ever live in Grandma Eleanor's house? I glanced at her. This remarkable child who had stood beside me through one of the most difficult days of my life. Would you want to? She was quiet for a moment, considering. I think so. Grandma told me stories about it whenever we talked on the phone. About the garden and the window seat in the library where you used to read for hours. About the kitchen where she taught you to bake pies. She looked out at the passing streets. It seems like it should have been our home all along. Yes, I whispered, unexpected tears stinging my eyes. It should have been. That night, as Lily slept in the hotel bed beside me, I sat by the window looking out at the stars over Oak Ridge, turning my mother's locket over in my hands. Inside were 2 tiny photographs, one of my mother holding me as a baby, and one of her with Eleanor, their smiles so similar it made my heart ache. For 15 years, I'd lived with the belief that I was somehow responsible for the tragedy that had shaped my life. I'd moved to the city, built a small, quiet existence far from the memories that haunted me. I'd raised Lily alone, never telling her the full story of her grandmother's death, afraid the weight of it would crush her as it had nearly crushed me. But Eleanor had known the truth would set us free. Even in her final act, she had been looking out for us, making sure we had what we needed to reclaim our place in the world. As I finally slipped into bed beside my daughter, I realized that for the first time in years, the future stretched before us, not as something to endure, but as something to embrace. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Chief Warner called early, informing us that state police detectives would be arriving by noon to take over the investigation. Patricia, Robert, and Diane had been instructed not to leave town, though no formal charges had been filed yet. They're lawyering. Up, he said, his voice grim. Robert's already claiming the photographs were doctored, that this is all a scheme to steal their inheritance. Their inheritance? I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. Everything they have was built on lies. We know that, he assured me. And soon, everyone else will too. After breakfast, Michael arrived at the hotel with a thick folder of documents. I've been going through Eleanor's financial records, he explained as we sat in the small lobby, away from curious ears. There's evidence of systematic fraud going back years. Patricia has been siphoning money from Eleanor's accounts, forging her signature on checks, even taking out loans against the property. How did she get away with it for so long? I asked. She isolated Eleanor, controlled who she spoke to, what mail she received. Classic elder abuse. He shook his head sadly. But Eleanor was smarter than Patricia gave her credit for. She started keeping records about 3 years ago, after she first suspected something was wrong. When Helen finally contacted her 6 months ago with the truth about your mother, all the pieces fell into place. Lily, who had been quietly listening to our conversation, suddenly spoke up. So, Grandma Eleanor was collecting evidence this whole time? That's why she changed her will and hid those boxes? Michael smiled at her. Exactly. Your great-grandmother was playing a long game. She knew she was running out of time, so she made sure everything was in place for the truth to come out after she was gone. A familiar voice cut through the quiet lobby like a knife. How touching. A family reunion. Patricia stood by the entrance, dressed immaculately as always, but her usual composure was fraying at the edges. Her eyes were hard, her smile brittle as she approached our table. Chief Warner had advised us to avoid contact with her, but here she was, cornering us in a public place where a scene would be embarrassing for everyone. What do you want, Patricia? I asked, instinctively moving closer to Lily. Just a chat, she replied, her voice artificially light. About this ridiculous story you're spreading around town. She glanced at Michael. I expected better from you, Mr. Bennett, entertaining these fantasies. Michael remained professionally calm. Mrs. Walker, I would strongly advise you not to discuss this matter without your attorney present. She ignored him, focusing on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. You know what your problem has always been, Emma? You can't let go of the past. Your mother died because she was careless. Henry couldn't handle his grief. And now you want to drag everyone through the mud with these absurd accusations. I felt Lily tense beside me, but before she could speak, I found my voice, stronger and steadier than I'd expected. We have evidence, Patricia. Photos, documents, police reports, my mother's journal. Eleanor knew the truth, and now so do we. Something flickered behind her perfectly made-up facade. Fear, perhaps, or calculation. Evidence can be manipulated. Stories can be invented. Who do you think people will believe? Me, who's been a pillar of this community for 15 years? Or you, the troubled girl who ran away and barely bothered to visit her dying grandmother? That's not true, Lily burst out, unable to contain herself any longer. You kept Mom away. You lied to Grandma Eleanor about her letters. Patricia's gaze shifted to my daughter, and the coldness in her eyes made my blood run cold. Children should be seen and not heard, Lily. Didn't your mother teach you any manners? I stood up so quickly my chair scraped loudly against the floor, drawing glances from the hotel staff. Don't speak to my daughter. Don't even look at her. You've taken enough from us. Patricia didn't back down, but she lowered her voice to a venomous whisper. This won't end the way you think it will, Emma. You have no idea what you're up against. Whatever Eleanor thought she knew, whatever she told you, it won't be enough. It never is. Was that a threat? A confession? Before I could respond, the hotel manager approached, clearly concerned by the rising tension. Is everything all right here? Fine, Patricia said, smoothing her expression into something resembling normality. Just a family discussion. She turned to leave, then paused, looking back at me one last time. Think about what I said, Emma. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. As she walked away, Michael let out a breath. Well, that was terrifying, Lily finished for him, her young face solemn. I sat back down, my hands trembling slightly. She's scared. She wouldn't have come here otherwise. Michael nodded, thoughtfully. She's trying to intimidate you into backing down. Classic tactic when someone knows they're cornered. But her words had struck a chord. What doors were we opening? What consequences hadn't we considered? As much as I wanted justice for my mother and grandfather, as much as I wanted the truth to be known, I couldn't ignore the fact that we were about to upend countless lives. Not just Patricia's family, I spent the next week in a daze, torn between the devastating revelations about my mother's death and the practical realities of the legal battle ahead. The state police had taken over the investigation completely, interviewing everyone connected to my mother and grandfather's deaths. Patricia and Robert had both been brought in for questioning multiple times, though neither had been formally charged yet. Diane had distanced herself from her mother and brother, claiming she'd known nothing about their actions 15 years ago. The town of Oak Ridge buzzed with whispers. I couldn't go anywhere. The grocery store, the cafe, even the post office, without feeling eyes on me, hearing conversations abruptly halt as I approached. Some offered sympathetic smiles or awkward condolences. Others watched with suspicious frowns, loyal to Patricia and her version of events. A community divided by loyalty, by who they chose to believe. People will talk, Helen told me over tea, in Eleanor's kitchen, my kitchen now. Let them. The truth doesn't depend on their gossip. She had become a frequent visitor, helping me sort through Eleanor's belongings, filling in gaps in my family history. Her courage in finally coming forward had cost her. Patricia's supporters in town had made sure she felt their disapproval, but she carried herself with quiet dignity that I admired. I just wish I could understand why no one questioned it. Before, I said, watching Lily through the window as she explored the garden. Mom and Grandpa die within months of each other. Patricia suddenly controls everything, and everyone just accepted it? Helen sighed, her weathered hands cradling her teacup. Grief makes people blind, Emma. And Patricia was very clever. She became the grieving widow, the devoted daughter-in-law taking care of poor Eleanor. She joined the right committees, donated to the right charities, befriended the right people. She built a fortress of respectability around herself. While stealing everything my family built, I added bitterly. Yes. Helen's eyes met mine, regret etched in the lines of her face. And I let her because I was afraid. That's something I'll have to live with. I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. You came forward when it mattered most. That counts for something. The doorbell interrupted our conversation. Michael had taken to stopping by each evening, ostensibly to update me on legal developments, though we both knew his visits had become more personal than professional. I found myself looking forward to his arrival, to his steady presence, his thoughtful insights. But when I opened the door, it wasn't Michael who stood on the porch. It was Diane Walker. "Hello, Emma," she said, her usual polished appearance slightly disheveled. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her designer clothes looked as if she'd slept in them. "May I come in?" I hesitated, one hand still on the door. Diane had always followed Patricia's lead, echoing her mother's dismissive attitudes, her cutting remarks. I couldn't remember the last time she'd spoken to me directly, without contempt coloring her voice. "Please," she added, something like desperation creeping into her tone. "I need to talk to you. About Robert." Curiosity won over caution. I stepped aside, allowing her to enter, but kept my guard up. "Helen's in the kitchen," I warned her. "And Lily's in the garden." She nodded, following me into the living room where we could speak privately. She perched on the edge of Eleanor's favorite armchair, looking uncomfortably out of place. "I've left home," she said abruptly. "I couldn't stay there anymore. Not after what I found." "What did you find?" I asked, sitting across from her, careful to keep my expression neutral. Diane reached into her handbag, removing a small notebook bound in dark leather. This was in Robert's desk. I was looking for his checkbook. Mother's frozen all the accounts, and I needed money for a hotel room. She handed it to me, her hand trembling slightly. "I think you should read it." I opened the notebook cautiously. The first pages contained mundane notes, appointments, phone numbers, reminders. But as I flipped further, the entries became more disturbing. Detailed observations about my mother's daily routines in the weeks before her death. Notes about my grandfather's heart medication. Names of police officers who might be sympathetic to our situation. Sketches of what appeared to be the garage where Helen had photographed him tampering with my mother's car. He kept a record, I whispered, horror creeping through me. Of everything. Not everything, Diane replied, her voice hollow. Just enough to implicate Mother in every decision. Insurance, I suppose, in case things ever went wrong. She looked away, staring at a family photo on the mantel. He always was calculating, even as a teenager. I studied her face, searching for deception. Why bring this to me? Why now? She met my gaze, and I was surprised to see tears in her eyes. Because I didn't know. I swear to you, Emma, I didn't know what they did. A tear slipped down her cheek. I was at college when your mother died. I knew there was tension, that Mother wanted control of the family business. But murder? She shook her head. I would never have been part of that. But afterward, I pressed. You must have suspected something when Grandpa died so conveniently. I questioned it, she admitted. Once. Mother told me I was being paranoid, that grief was making me think crazy thoughts. And I wanted to believe her. It was easier than considering the alternative. She wiped at her tears. I've spent 15 years not asking questions I was afraid to hear the answers to. What does that make me? I didn't answer immediately. What did it make her? A coward? An accomplice? Or just another victim of Patricia's manipulation, choosing comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths? What exactly are you hoping for here, Diane? I finally asked. Forgiveness? Absolution? No, she said quickly. I don't deserve either. I'm hoping to make amends, in whatever small way I can. She gestured to the notebook. That should help your case. And I'm prepared to testify about other things. Financial documents I helped Mother transfer after Henry died. Conversations I overheard. You realize what that would mean? I said carefully. Testifying against your own mother and brother. She nodded, her expression resolute despite her tears. I've made my choice. It's 15 years too late, but it's the only one I can live with now. After Diane left, I called Michael immediately, explaining about the notebook and her offer to testify. He arrived within 20 minutes, reviewing the contents with growing excitement. This is the smoking gun we needed, he said, carefully placing the notebook in an evidence bag he'd brought from his car. Robert was meticulous, detailed dates, times, even recorded snippets of conversations with Patricia about the plan for your mother. Do you think Diane is telling the truth? That she wasn't involved? Michael considered this. It's possible. The entries only mention Patricia and Robert by name. There's no reference to Diane at all, which seems significant, if she had been part of it. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd come to recognize as a sign he was thinking deeply. Either way, her testimony about the aftermath, the financial maneuvers, the conversations she witnessed, will be valuable. I sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. It's never going to end, is it? Every day, some new revelation, some new horror to process. Michael sat beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, but not touching. He'd been careful about that, respectful of boundaries neither of us had explicitly defined. It will end, Emma. Maybe not as quickly as you'd like, but it will. And then you and Lily can start building something new. Something new, I repeated softly. That's what I keep telling myself. That all of this... I gestured vaguely around the room, encompassing the house, the investigation, the upended lives, is clearing the ground for something better to grow. He smiled, the expression warming his eyes. An apt metaphor, considering. Eleanor's garden. At the mention of the garden, I felt a pang of guilt. I should be doing more out there. Eleanor loved those roses, and I'm neglecting them. Plants are more resilient than you might think, he said gently. They can survive periods of neglect, especially if their roots are strong. Our eyes met, and something unspoken passed between us, an acknowledgement that he wasn't just talking about roses anymore. I looked away first, flustered by the intensity of the moment. I should check on Lily, I said, rising from the couch. It's getting dark. He stood too, gathering his briefcase. Of course, I'll take the notebook directly to Detective Marshall. He'll want to interview Diane as soon as possible. At the door, he paused. Emma? For what it's worth, I think you're handling all of this with remarkable grace. Your grandmother would be proud. The words touched something deep within me, a place that had been aching for reassurance. Thank you, I managed, my voice thick with emotion. That means more than you know. After he left, I found Lily sitting on the back porch steps, AE, sketchbook open on her lap. She'd been drawing the old oak tree that dominated the far corner of the garden, its sprawling branches captured with surprising skill for a 12-year-old. That's beautiful, sweetheart, I said, sitting beside her. She smiled up at me. Grandma Eleanor told me she used to climb that tree when she was little. Said it had the best view of the whole neighborhood. I'm going to try it tomorrow. Just be careful, I cautioned, though I couldn't help smiling at the thought of my proper, dignified grandmother as a tree-climbing girl. Lily closed her sketchbook, leaning against my shoulder. Mom? Are we staying here? For good, I mean? I wrapped an arm around her, considering the question. I think so. Would you like that? She nodded, her expression thoughtful. It feels right here, like we're supposed to be here. She hesitated. I wish I'd known Grandma Eleanor better, before she got sick. Me too, I admitted, for both of us. We sat in companionable silence as twilight deepened around us, fireflies beginning to dance among the roses. For a moment, I could almost imagine Eleanor there with us, watching over her beloved garden, over the granddaughter and great-granddaughter she'd fought so hard to protect. That night, I dreamed of my mother. Not the idealized version my grief had created over the years, but Caroline as she truly had been, laughing too loudly at bad jokes, forgetting to close cabinet doors, painting, her nails bright colors that clashed with everything she owned. In the dream, we sat on this same porch, watching a younger me chase fireflies in the gathering darkness. You're doing beautifully, Emma, she said, her voice so achingly familiar it hurt. Exactly what I hoped you would. I'm trying, I told her. But it's hard. She smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear as she had done so often in life. The hardest things are usually the most worthwhile. I woke with tears on my pillow, but a curious lightness in my chest. For the first time since the will reading, since the revelations that had followed, I felt something like hope taking root inside me. The next morning brought a call from Detective Marshall. Robert Walker had been arrested for breaking into Reynolds' antiques and assaulting Diana. During questioning, faced with the evidence from his own notebook, he had finally broken down and confessed to tampering with Caroline's brakes on Patricia's instructions. He was now offering to testify against his mother in exchange for leniency. And Patricia? I asked, my hand gripping the phone tightly. We're bringing her in now, Marshall replied, with Robert's confession, Diane's testimony, and the physical evidence. We have more than enough for an arrest warrant. After hanging up, I stood in Eleanor's kitchen, my kitchen, feeling strangely hollow. Justice was coming, finally, but it wouldn't bring my mother back. It wouldn't restore the years I'd lost with my grandmother. It wouldn't erase the guilt I'd carried for so long. But it was something. A reckoning. A chance for truth to prevail. even if belatedly. I was still standing there when Lily came downstairs, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Mom, are you okay?" I smiled, pushing aside my heavy thoughts. "Yes, sweetheart, just thinking about what we should do today." Her face brightened. "Can we go to the antique shop?" Diana said she'd show me how to identify real silver from plate. "That sounds perfect," I agreed, grateful for the normalcy of the request. Despite everything, life continued. My daughter still needed to learn, to grow, to experience joy. As we prepared to leave, my phone rang again, an unfamiliar number with the local area code. I answered cautiously. "Emma Reynolds?" A woman's voice, oddly formal. "Yes, this is Emma." "My name is Rebecca Hamilton. I was a friend of your mother's, and later your grandmother's. I'm a judge in the county court." Judge Hamilton, the woman Eleanor had sent a copy of her recorded testimony to. "Yes, of course," I said. "Diana Wells mentioned you. I'd like to meet with you if possible. Today, preferably. There's something Eleanor left in my keeping that I believe you should have. Another piece of the puzzle. Another gift from beyond the grave." "Of course. When and where?" "My chambers at the courthouse. Is 11 o'clock convenient?" I agreed, curiosity overriding any hesitation. What else had Eleanor prepared? What other safeguards had she put in place? Diana was understanding when I called to postpone our silver lesson, insisting that Lily could still come to the shop while I met with the judge. "I'll teach her everything I know," she promised. Eleanor would have wanted that. The county. Courthouse was an imposing structure of red brick and white columns, dominating one end of Main Street. I hadn't been inside since I was a teenager, accompanying Eleanor to pay property taxes. The marble floors and high ceilings still inspired the same hushed reverence as a church. Judge Hamilton's chambers were on the second floor, at the end of a long corridor lined with portraits of previous judges. Her assistant, a young man with kind eyes, showed me in immediately. Rebecca Hamilton rose from behind her desk as I entered. A tall, slender woman in her 60s with silver hair cut in a precise bob and intelligent eyes behind rimless glasses. She extended her hand, her grip firm and confident. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Reynolds. Please sit down." I took the offered chair, noting the framed photographs on her desk, one of a younger Rebecca with my mother, both in hiking gear on what appeared to be a mountain trail, another of her with Eleanor, at what looked like a charity event, arms linked, both smiling broadly. "Your mother and I were roommates in law school," she explained, following my gaze. "We remained close until her death. And afterward, I tried to stay connected to Eleanor, though Patricia made that increasingly difficult over the years. She was good at isolating people," I said, thinking of my own estrangement from my grandmother. Judge Hamilton nodded grimly. "Very effective. By the time I realized what was happening, the damage was done. Eleanor and I managed to maintain some contact, but it was constrained." She opened a drawer in her desk, removing a sealed envelope and a small flash drive. 6 months ago, Eleanor contacted me for the first time in years without Patricia's knowledge. She was very weak by then, but absolutely determined. She asked me to keep these safe until after her death, after the will reading. She placed them on the desk between us. The envelope bore my name in Eleanor's distinctive handwriting. The flash drive contains copies of all the evidence Eleanor gathered, financial records, Helen's photographs, everything. "Insurance," she called it. The envelope. She hesitated. "The contents are private, for you alone." I took both items, feeling their weight in my hands, literal and figurative. "Thank you for keeping them safe." Eleanor was one of the strongest women I've ever known, Judge Hamilton said, her professional demeanor softening slightly. "What Patricia and her son did to your family was unconscionable. The fact that they've escaped justice for 15 years is a failure of our system, one I'm personally gratified to see corrected. There was something in her tone that suggested personal involvement beyond friendship. "Did you suspect?" asked. "About my mother's death?" She sighed, removing her glasses and rubbing the bridge of her nose. I had concerns. Caroline had called me the week before, asking questions about emergency custody orders, about how quickly she could legally remove a minor from an unsafe home environment. She was vague about the details, but I knew she was frightened. She replaced her glasses, her expression regretful. When the accident happened so soon after, I tried to push for a more thorough investigation, but Henry's heart attack changed everything. Without him pressing the issue, without clear evidence of foul play, the case was closed. Another person who had tried to help, who had suspected but couldn't prove. Another thread in the complex tapestry of deception Patricia had woven around my family. "I'm grateful to you," I said simply, "for being my mother's friend, for helping Eleanor, for keeping these safe." She smiled, and for a moment I could see the younger woman from the hiking photograph, the one who had known my mother in happier times. "Caroline would be incredibly proud of you, Emma, and of Lily. Eleanor showed me pictures. She looks so much like your mother." I left the courthouse with the envelope and flash drive secure in my purse, my mind swirling with yet another connection I hadn't known existed. My mother's law school roommate, a judge who had tried to push for investigation, a friendship that had survived death and deception. The more I learned, the more I realized how little I had actually known about my mother and grandmother. They had been real, complex women with friendships, passions, and strengths I was only now beginning to discover. Instead of returning directly to Diana's shop, I found myself driving to Oak Ridge Cemetery. I hadn't visited my mother's grave since returning to town. It had felt too painful, too weighted with the guilt I'd carried for 15 years. But now, with the truth finally emerging, I needed to see her. The cemetery was peaceful in the late morning light, oak trees casting dappled shadows across well-tended plots. My mother's grave lay on a gentle slope overlooking a small pond, a beautiful spot Eleanor had chosen. The headstone was simple white marble, engraved with her name, dates, and the words, "Beloved daughter, mother, and friend." I sat on the grass beside the grave, placing my hand on the sun-warmed stone. "Hello, Mom," I said softly. "I'm sorry it's been so long." In the quiet that followed, I told her everything about Eleanor's will, about the evidence she'd collected, about Patricia's imminent arrest, about Lily's talent for drawing, her curiosity, her resilience, about the house we were making our own again, about Michael and the unexpected feelings developing between us. "I wish you could have seen all of this," I finished, tears flowing freely now. "I wish you could know Lily. She has your laugh, your determination. She would have adored you." I opened my purse, removing Eleanor's envelope. Whatever final message my grandmother had left me, this felt like the right place to read it. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then Judge Hamilton has fulfilled her promise, and you now know the truth about your mother's death. I can only imagine the pain this knowledge has brought you, even as it frees you from the burden of undeserved guilt. There is one final truth I must share with you, one I couldn't include in my recorded testimony or leave in the boxes at the house. It concerns Patricia directly, and the true reason she was so desperate to control the Reynolds fortune. 2 months before Caroline died, Henry discovered something disturbing in the family business accounts. Large sums of money had been transferred to offshore accounts, and crucial tax payments had been missed. When he investigated further, he found that Patricia had been embezzling from Reynolds' antiques for years, not just taking small amounts, but systematically draining the business. The confrontation was ugly. Henry threatened to go to the police, to divorce her, to expose what she had done. Patricia begged for time, claimed she could replace the money. Henry, being the kind man he was, agreed to give her 30 days to make restitution before he took legal action. Caroline became aware of the situation when she overheard them arguing. She immediately recognized the danger, knowing Patricia better than Henry ever had. That's why she was planning to take you away, to protect you from what she feared might happen. After both Caroline and Henry were gone, I found Henry's private records hidden in his fishing tackle box, a place Patricia would never look. They detailed everything, the embezzlement, his ultimatum, even his suspicions after Caroline's death. But by then, Patricia controlled everything. I was ill, confused by grief, and she had already isolated me from friends who might have helped. By the time I realized the full extent of what she had done, my illness had progressed too far for me to seek justice directly. That became my final mission, to gather evidence, make arrangements, ensure that even after I was gone, the truth would find its way to light. These records are not included on the flash drive I gave Judge Hamilton. They are in a different place altogether, the basement of Reynolds Antiques, behind the loose brick in the north wall, where your mother and I used to hide special treasures when she was a girl. The combination to the lockbox is your birthday, month, day, year. This evidence proves not only Patricia's original crime, but establishes the motive for everything that followed. Without it, she might still find a way to create doubt about her involvement in Caroline's death. With it, her fate is sealed. My darling girl, I know these revelations have been painful. I know the road ahead will not be easy. But you are stronger. Then you know. You are Caroline's daughter, and my granddaughter. You have survived 15 years of undeserved guilt and isolation. You have raised a remarkable daughter of your own. The house is yours now. The business. The truth. All the things that should have been yours from the beginning. Make of them what you will, but never forget that you come from a line of women who faced adversity with courage and grace. I love you, Emma. I have always loved you, and I am so very proud of the woman you have become. All my love, Grandma Eleanor. I sat motionless, the letter trembling in my hands, tears blurring my vision. The final piece of the puzzle, the original crime that had triggered all that followed. Not just greed for inheritance, but desperation to cover up years of theft. With shaking fingers, I folded the letter carefully and returned it to my purse. Then I stood, brushing grass from my clothes, and placed my hand on my mother's headstone, one last time. I'll make it right, I promised softly, for both of you. I drove directly to Reynolds Antiques, my mind racing. If Eleanor's information was correct, the evidence in the basement would seal Patricia's fate completely. No clever lawyer could explain away years of systematic embezzlement, followed by 2 suspicious deaths. Diana looked up in surprise when I burst through the door. "Emma, is everything all right?" "Where's Lily?" I asked, glancing around the shop. "In the back office, cataloging some silver spoons? She's quite good at it, actually." Diana's brow furrowed with concern. "What's happened?" "I need to check something in the basement," I replied, already moving toward the door that led to the stairs. Eleanor left something there, evidence about Patricia's original crime. Diana's eyes widened. Original crime? She was embezzling. From the business for years before Mom died. Grandpa found out, threatened to expose her. It's why she arranged the accident. The words tumbled out in a rush as I opened the basement door. Eleanor hid the proof behind a loose brick in the north wall. "Wait," Diana said, grabbing a flashlight from behind the counter. "The lighting down there is terrible, and I should come with you. Those steps are treacherous." Together, we descended into the basement, a large cellar-like space that had always frightened me as a child. It smelled of dust and old paper, with shelves of inventory records stretching back decades. The north wall, I murmured, orienting myself. That would be there. I pointed to a section of exposed brick beyond the shelving units. Diana aimed the flashlight, illuminating the aged red bricks. Do you know which one? I approached the wall slowly, running my fingers over the rough surface. Mom and Eleanor used to hide things down here. Special treasures, the letter said. I closed my eyes, trying to remember. There was a brick that looked different, slightly darker than the others. My fingers found it, a brick that sat proud of the wall by perhaps a 1/4 inch, its color a deeper red than those surrounding it. I pressed gently on one edge, and it pivoted smoothly, revealing a small cavity behind. Inside was a metal lockbox, dusty but intact. My hands trembled as I pulled it out, turning the combination lock to my birth date as Eleanor had instructed. The mechanism clicked, and the lid opened. Inside were neatly organized folders containing bank statements, transaction, records, copies of forged checks, all meticulously labeled in Henry's precise handwriting. A separate envelope contained what appeared to be correspondence between Henry and the family lawyer regarding Patricia's embezzlement and the 30-day grace period he had granted her. My God, Diana whispered, peering over my shoulder at the documents. Henry documented everything. And Eleanor kept it all safe, I said, my voice thick with emotion, waiting for the right moment. For you, Diana corrected gently. She kept it safe for you. As we carefully gathered the evidence, I heard footsteps on the basement stairs. Looking up, I saw Lily peering down at us curiously. Mom? Diana? What are you doing down there? I smiled up at my daughter, this remarkable child who had stood beside me through the most difficult months of our lives, finding the last piece of the puzzle, sweetheart. The final truth Grandma Eleanor left for us. Is it over now? She asked, her young face solemn. Will the bad people go to jail? Diana and I exchanged glances, both thinking of the documents. In my hands, the proof of crimes committed long before Lily was born, crimes that had shaped all our lives in ways we were only beginning to understand. Yes, I said firmly, clutching the lockbox to my chest. It's almost over, and then we can truly begin again. 2 days later, I sat in Chief Warner's office once more, watching as he and Detective Marshall reviewed the contents of Henry's lockbox. Their expressions grew increasingly grim as they examined each piece of evidence. This establishes clear motive, Marshall said finally, looking up at me. Combined with Robert's confession and the other evidence, it creates an absolutely solid case against Patricia Walker. We've already forwarded copies to the district attorney, Chief Warner added. He's adding financial fraud and embezzlement charges to the existing case. What happens now? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Patricia will be formally charged with 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, financial fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. Marshall's tone was matter-of-fact. With the evidence we have, including Robert's testimony against her, she's looking at spending the rest of her life in prison. I should have felt triumph, or at least satisfaction. Instead, I felt a complex mixture of grief and relief. And Robert? Diane? Robert has agreed to plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for his testimony. He'll still serve substantial time. Warner's expression softened slightly. As for Diane, the district attorney has decided not to pursue charges against her. Her cooperation has been valuable, and there's no evidence she was involved in the original crimes. I nodded, thinking of Diane's tear-stained face as she had handed me Robert's notebook. Whatever her faults, whatever her willful blindness, she had finally chosen truth over family loyalty. Thank you, I said, rising from my chair, for everything you've done. Warner smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of his eyes. Your grandmother would be proud, Ms. Reynolds. She never gave up hope that the truth would come out someday. As I left the police station, stepping into the bright spring sunshine, I felt lighter somehow. The truth had not erased the pain of the past 15 years. It had not brought my mother or grandfather back, but it had freed me from the weight of undeserved guilt, had restored what rightfully belonged to Lily and me, and had finally brought justice to those who had thought themselves above it. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Good news. Judge denied Patricia's bail request. She'll remain in custody until trial. How are you holding up? I smiled at his thoughtfulness, typing a quick reply. Better than expected. Just left the station. Heading home now. Home. The word still felt new on my tongue, even after 3 months in Eleanor's house, my house now. But each day, it felt more right, more truly ours. Lily had painted her bedroom sunshine yellow, had claimed the window seat in the library, as her reading nook had begun learning the names of each rose variety in the garden, and I had begun to heal, to forgive myself for the guilt I'd carried so long, to reconnect with the memories of my mother and grandmother that Patricia had tried to erase. I was reclaiming not just the physical spaces of my heritage, but the emotional ones as well. As I drove through the familiar streets of Oak Ridge toward the house on Maple Street, I thought about what Eleanor had written in her final letter to me. You come from a line of women who faced adversity with courage and grace. I hadn't always felt courageous or graceful during these past months of revelations and legal battles. There had been days of overwhelming grief, of rage so intense it frightened me, of doubt about whether exposing the truth was worth the pain it caused. But I had persisted. For my mother, who had died trying to protect me. For my grandfather, who had stood up against deception. For Eleanor, who had spent her final months gathering evidence to ensure justice would eventually prevail. And for Lily, who deserved to know her true heritage, to grow up in a home built on honesty rather than lies. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw her waiting on the porch steps, sketchbook open on her lap, sunlight catching in her hair. So like my mother's, it made my heart ache. She looked up as I approached, her face breaking into a smile that held all the promise of our future together. "Mom," she called, waving her drawing. "Look what I did today." I climbed the steps to join her, embracing the simple joy of this moment, of the ordinary miracles that somehow survived even the darkest times. Whatever came next, the trial, the inevitable public scrutiny, the slow process of rebuilding our lives, we would face it together. With courage, with grace, just as Eleanor had known we would. Summer arrived in Oak Ridge with a burst of color and warmth that seemed to transform the town overnight. The roses in Eleanor's garden, my garden now, bloomed in magnificent profusion, their fragrances mingling in the morning air as I sipped coffee on the back porch. Lily had taken to waking early, eager to tend to the plants that had become her passion. She worked alongside Helen Davis, who visited most mornings to share her knowledge of the garden Eleanor had loved so much. "These tea roses need more sun," Helen advised, guiding Lily's hands as they carefully pruned a pale pink bush. "Your great-grandmother planted them here 30 years ago, but that maple has grown so much since then, it's blocking their light. Can we move them?" Lily asked, her face serious with concentration. "In the fall," Helen promised. "When they're dormant. They'll be happier on the south side, near the trellis." I watched them from my seat on the porch steps, struck by the easy rapport between the elderly woman and my daughter. In the 3 months since the truth about my mother's death had emerged, Helen had become a fixture in our lives, part grandmother, part historian, part gardening mentor. Her presence filled some of the void left by Eleanor's absence, connecting us to a past that had nearly been erased. Michael emerged from the house behind me, carrying his own mug of coffee. He'd started spending more nights here than at his own apartment, though we both maintained the fiction that it was temporary, practical. His help with the legal complexities that still surrounded us. Neither of us seemed ready to label what was growing between us. but we'd stopped pretending it wasn't happening. "They look happy," he observed, nodding toward Lily and Helen among the roses. "They are," I agreed, shifting to make room for him on the step. "I think we all are, surprisingly enough." Despite the painful revelations, despite the looming trial that dominated local gossip, despite the occasional ugly remarks from Patricia's remaining supporters in town, we had found a tentative peace in the old house on Maple Street, a sense of rightness, of belonging, of coming home after a long, difficult journey. "The district attorney called this morning," Michael said, his tone carefully neutral. "They've set a trial date for Patricia, September 10th. I nodded, absorbing the information. Despite Robert's confession and the mountain of evidence against her, Patricia had maintained her innocence, hiring an expensive defense team from the city to fight the charges. The preliminary hearings had been contentious, with her lawyers attempting to discredit Helen's testimony, question the chain of evidence, even suggest that Eleanor's illness had made her paranoid and vindictive. None of it had worked. The case was proceeding to trial with Patricia facing multiple felony charges. But the process was taking its toll on all of us. The constant legal meetings, the press coverage, the need to relive the most painful chapters of our family history over and over again. "Will I need to testify?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Michael nodded, his expression sympathetic. "Yes, so will Helen and Diana, and the DA wants to prepare you all extensively beforehand. Patricia's lawyers will try to undermine your credibility, suggest you orchestrated this to gain the inheritance." "Which is ridiculous," I said, feeling a flare of indignation. "I didn't even know about the amended will until the reading." "I know that," he assured me, his hand finding mine on the step between us. "And the jury will know it too, once they hear the evidence. But you should be prepared for how aggressive the questioning might be." I sighed, leaning slightly against his shoulder. "I just want it to be over, to move forward without constantly looking back." "It will be," he promised. "And then you can focus on the future, the house, the shop, your art." My art. The mention sent a small thrill through me. After years of suppressing my creative impulses, of believing I didn't deserve to pursue what I loved, I had finally started painting again. Just small pieces at first. Watercolor studies of Eleanor's roses, charcoal sketches of the house. But lately, larger works had begun to take shape in the sunroom I'd converted to a studio, paintings that explored grief and healing, loss and redemption. "Speaking of the shop," I said, changing the subject slightly, "Diana called yesterday. The estate appraisal is finally complete. We can start planning the reopening. Reynolds Antiques had been closed since Eleanor's death, its future uncertain while the legal battles raged. But now, with Patricia's assets frozen and control of the family business officially returned to me, it was time to bring it back to life." Diana had agreed to stay on as manager, her expertise invaluable as I learned the business my grandparents had built. "That's wonderful news," Michael said, his smile warming his eyes. Eleanor would be thrilled. A comfortable silence fell between us as we watched Lily and Helen move to another section of the garden. The morning light caught in Lily's hair, turning it to copper. So like my mother's, it sometimes took my breath away. In these moments, the continuity of our family felt tangible, a thread stretching backward and forward through time, unbroken, despite Patricia's best efforts to sever it. The peaceful moment was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the driveway, Detective Marshall's unmarked police cruiser. He'd been a constant presence in our lives since the investigation began, his quiet professionalism a steadying influence during the chaos that followed Patricia's arrest. "Ms. Reynolds," he greeted me as he approached the porch. "Mr. Bennett, sorry to disturb you so early." "It's fine," I assured him, noting the folder in his hand. "More paperwork for the trial?" He shook his head, his expression unreadable. "Not exactly. There's been a development I thought you should hear in person rather than through official channels. He glanced toward Lily in the garden. Perhaps we could speak inside? A chill ran through me despite the summer warmth. Something in his tone suggested news I might not want to hear. Michael must have sensed my unease because his hand tightened briefly around mine before we both stood to lead Detective Marshall into the house. In the living room, with the French doors closed to ensure privacy, Marshall finally spoke. Patricia, Walker attempted suicide in her cell last night. The words hung in the air, shocking in their starkness. I sank onto the sofa, trying to process what I'd just heard. Is she? She's alive, Marshall clarified quickly. The guards found her in time. She's in the hospital now, under supervision. How did she... Michael began, then seemed to think better of the question. Bed sheets, Marshall said grimly. Classic method for inmates. What's unusual is that she left a note. Addressed to you, Ms. Reynolds. He removed an evidence bag from his folder, inside which was a single sheet of paper. Through the plastic, I could see Patricia's elegant handwriting covering the page. Normally, this would be held as evidence, Marshall explained. But given the circumstances and after consultation with the district attorney, we decided you should see it. It's a confession, Ms. Reynolds. A complete confession. My heart hammered in my chest as I took the sealed bag, holding it carefully by the edges as I'd been taught. Through the plastic, I began to read. Emma, by the time you read this, I will be gone. I have lived with my crimes for 15 years, and I find I cannot face the public humiliation of a trial. The private shame has become unbearable. I killed your mother, not with my own hands, but through Robert's. He was always so eager to please, me so desperate for approval. When Henry discovered my embezzlement and threatened to expose me, I knew I would lose everything, my position, my freedom, perhaps even my son. Caroline had overheard too much. She was planning to take you away, to tell others what she knew. I couldn't allow that. I told Robert we were protecting ourselves, protecting what was rightfully ours. He believed me. Or perhaps he wanted to. Believe me. The plan was his, tampering with the brakes, staging it to look like an accident. But the intention was mine. When Henry began asking questions afterward, when he wouldn't accept the official explanation, I knew he would eventually discover the truth. His heart condition made it convenient. The medication was easy to alter. Another accident. Another tragedy for the grieving widow to endure. Eleanor was more difficult. She trusted me at first, in her grief. By the time she began to suspect, she was already ill, already isolated. I intercepted your letters, told her you wanted nothing to do with her, told you she couldn't bear to see you. The perfect separation, each of you believing the other had rejected you. But Helen Davis ruined everything. She had kept evidence all those years, photographs I never knew existed. When she finally told Eleanor the truth, it was too late to stop what followed. Eleanor was dying, but she was determined to set things right before she went. The amended will, the hidden boxes, the recordings. She orchestrated it all, knowing I wouldn't discover it until after she was gone. I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I offer this confession as the only amends I can make now. A complete accounting of my crimes, sparing you the pain of a public trial, and sparing Robert the consequences of his loyalty to me. The house is yours, the business, the life that should have been yours all along. I hope you find some peace in that, if not in knowing the truth about what happened to your mother. Patricia Walker. I finished reading, my hands trembling slightly as I placed the evidence bag on the coffee table. The confession was everything we had fought for. Complete, detailed, damning. But the hollow victory brought no satisfaction, only a profound sadness for all that had been lost, all the lives destroyed by one woman's greed and desperation. She won't die, Marshall said, perhaps misinterpreting my silence. The doctors are confident she'll recover physically, but this changes things legally. Her lawyers are already discussing a plea arrangement. No trial, no appeals, just a straightforward guilty plea to all charges. And Robert? Michael asked. His plea deal will stand. His testimony is no longer necessary with Patricia's confession, but he'll still serve time for his role in Caroline's death. I nodded, still struggling to find words appropriate to the moment. What did one say when finally confronted with the complete truth about a tragedy that had shaped 15 years of one's life? How did one respond to the suicide attempt of a woman who had orchestrated the deaths of one's mother and grandfather? "Thank you for bringing this to me," I finally managed. "It helps to know. To have the confirmation in her own words." Marshall nodded, his professional demeanor softening slightly. "I thought it might provide some closure. The legal process will continue, of course, but without the public spectacle of a trial. You and Lily won't have to testify now." After he left, Michael and I sat in silence for several long moments. Outside, we could hear Lily's laughter drifting from the garden, the sound incongruously bright against the heaviness of what we'd just learned. "Are you okay?" Michael finally asked, his voice gentle. "I don't know," I admitted. "I've spent months preparing myself for a trial, for the fight ahead, and now it's just over." She confessed. She tried to die rather than face what she'd done. I shook my head, trying to organize my thoughts. I should feel relieved, but instead I feel cheated? He suggested when I couldn't find the right word. Maybe, or maybe just sad, for all of it. For my mother and grandfather, for Eleanor, for Diane, who lost her family too. Even for Robert, in a way. He was barely more than a teenager when Patricia involved him in her crimes. Michael's arm slipped around my shoulders, drawing me against his side. "You're allowed to feel whatever you feel, Emma. There's no right way to process something like this." I leaned into his embrace, grateful for his steady presence, his unwavering support throughout the ordeal. "What happens now? With the legal case, I mean?" "Assuming Patricia recovers, and there's no reason to think she won't, her lawyers will work out a plea agreement with the district attorney. Multiple life sentences, most likely, to be served concurrently. No possibility of parole." His voice was matter-of-fact, professional. "It's actually the best outcome we could have hoped for. Justice served without putting you and Lily through the trauma of a trial." Justice served. The phrase echoed in my mind as I considered its meaning. Would my mother consider this justice? Her killer confessing 15 years too late? Would my grandfather? Would Eleanor, who had fought so hard to expose the truth? Perhaps justice wasn't the right word at all. Perhaps what we had achieved was simply truth. The full, unvarnished reality of what had happened to our family. And perhaps that would have to be enough. Lily's voice called from the garden, breaking into my thoughts. "Mom, come see what we found." I rose from the sofa, drawn by my daughter's excitement. Whatever philosophical questions remained about justice and closure could wait. Lily was here now, wanting to share a discovery with me. That moment mattered more than all the confessions and court proceedings in the world. In the garden, Lily and Helen stood beside an overgrown section of rose bushes near the old stone wall. As I approached, I saw what had captured their attention. A small metal plaque, tarnished with age and nearly hidden by foliage, embedded in the wall at about knee height. "We were clearing around the damask roses," Helen explained, and Lily noticed it catching the sunlight. I knelt to examine the plaque, brushing away dirt to reveal an inscription. "Caroline's Garden, where love grows wild and memories bloom eternal." 1980. My breath caught. "My father made this," I said softly, tracing the lettering with my fingertip. "For my mother's 25th birthday. He helped her plant this section of the garden. I'd forgotten all about it." "Your mother loved these roses," Helen said, her voice warm with memory. She said they reminded her of you, delicate-looking but surprisingly resilient. Lily knelt beside me, her expression solemn. Can we restore it? Make it special again? I looked at my daughter, this remarkable child who had faced so much upheaval with such grace, who had embraced Eleanor's legacy with such enthusiasm, and felt a surge of love so powerful it nearly overwhelmed me. Yes, I said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. I think that's exactly what we should do. Over the next few weeks, as summer reached its peak, Lily and I devoted ourselves to restoring Caroline's garden. We cleared the overgrowth, amended the soil, pruned the surviving roses, and planted new ones to replace those that had been lost to neglect. Helen guided us, sharing her knowledge of the original design and my mother's preferences. Michael helped with the heavier work, building a new trellis and repairing the stone pathways that had become uneven with time. It became a form of therapy, for all of us, a way to honor Caroline's memory that felt tangible, meaningful. Each evening, dirt-stained and weary, we would sit on the porch steps and admire our progress, planning the next day's tasks with an enthusiasm that had nothing to do with the legal proceedings that continued in the background of our lives. Patricia recovered from her suicide attempt, but remained in the psychiatric ward of the county hospital, her lawyers negotiating the terms of her plea agreement. Robert's sentencing was scheduled for August, with Diane expected to testify on his behalf, arguing for leniency based on his cooperation and Patricia's manipulative influence. And through it all, life in the house on Maple Street continued, not unmarked by the past, but no longer defined by it either. One evening in late July, as we finished dinner on the back porch, Michael cleared his throat nervously. "I have something to ask you," he said, his usual composure noticeably absent. "Both of you, actually." Lily and I exchanged curious glances across the table. "What is it?" I prompted when he seemed hesitant to continue. He took a deep breath. "I've been offered a position with a law firm in Portland. A good position, partner track, better salary, more interesting cases." My heart sank. Portland was nearly 2 hours away. Too far for daily commuting, too far for our comfortable routine of shared meals and quiet evenings to continue. "Oh," I managed, trying to keep the disappointment from my voice. "That's wonderful. A great opportunity for you." "It is," he agreed, then hesitated again. "The thing is, I've been thinking about what's kept me in Oak Ridge all these years. My practice is steady but not particularly challenging. I stayed because it was comfortable, familiar, because I never had a compelling reason to leave." His eyes met mine across the table. "Until now." Lily looked between us, her expression puzzled. "You're leaving because of us?" Michael smiled. At her, his nervousness giving way to something warmer. "Actually, I'm hoping you might consider coming with me, both of you." He turned back to me, his gaze steady despite the vulnerability in his expression. "I know it's sudden, and I know there's the house and the shop to consider, but Portland has an amazing art scene, excellent schools, and it's close enough that we could still come back to Oak Ridge whenever you wanted." I stared at him, caught completely off guard by the suggestion. "You want us to move to Portland? Together?" "I want us to be a family," he said simply. "If that's something you might want too." Lily's eyes widened. "Like, you'd be my dad?" Michael's expression softened as he looked at her. "I'd be honored to be your dad, Lily, if that's something you'd be okay with. I know I could never replace your biological father, but I'd do my best to be someone you could count on." Lily considered this solemnly. "Would I still be able to tend Grandma Eleanor's roses?" "We'd come back as often as you wanted," he promised, "and maybe we could plant some roses at our new home too." She nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer. "I think I'd like that. Having you be my dad, I mean." He smiled at her, then turned his attention back to me, waiting for my response. I found myself at a loss for words, overwhelmed by the unexpected proposal, not just of marriage, though that was implied, but of a complete reimagining of our future. "I need some time," I finally said, "to think about what it would mean for the house, for the business." "Of course," he agreed quickly. "Take all the time you need. The offer doesn't expire for 2 weeks, and even then, I could ask for an extension." Later that night, after Lily had gone to bed, I sat alone in Eleanor's study, my study now, surrounded by the books and mementos of my grandmother's life. The antique desk where she had written letters, balanced accounts, planned her garden. The shelves filled with leather-bound volumes she had collected over decades. The photographs of family that she had kept displayed even when Patricia controlled every other aspect of her life. Could I leave this house, this sanctuary we had fought so hard to reclaim? Could I uproot Lily again, just when she was beginning, to feel settled? Could I trust in the future Michael envisioned for us, after 15 years of carrying my grief and guilt alone? My gaze fell on a small silver frame holding a photograph I hadn't examined closely before. Eleanor, as a young woman, perhaps my age now, standing in front of a building I didn't recognize. She looked vibrant, confident, her smile radiant as she held up a set of keys. On the back, written in her distinctive handwriting, "New Beginnings, Reynolds Antiques, 1955. I studied the image, struck by the joy in my grandmother's face as she embarked on a new chapter of her life. The shop had been her passion, her purpose. But it had also been a beginning, a leap of faith taken with my grandfather by her side. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. "Emma?" Michael's voice, hesitant. "Can I come in?" "Yes," I called, still holding the photograph as he entered. He approached cautiously, as if afraid of pressuring me. "I'm sorry if I overwhelmed you earlier. The timing probably wasn't ideal." I shook my head. "It's not that. It's just..." I gestured around the study, at the house beyond. "This place means so much. It's where I grew up, where my mother grew up. It's Eleanor's legacy." "I understand," he said, and I believed he did. "We don't have to sell it. We could keep it as a weekend home, a place to retreat to. Or we could stay here and I could commute, at least for a while." I considered his words, touched by his willingness to compromise. But something about the photograph in my hands made me look deeper, beyond the immediate emotional attachment to the house itself. "Eleanor didn't live here her whole life," I said slowly, the realization forming as I spoke. "She and Grandpa moved several times before settling here. The shop was in 3 different locations before they bought the building on Main Street. They weren't afraid of change." Michael watched me carefully, not interrupting as I worked through my thoughts aloud. "This house matters because of the memories it holds, because of what it represents, the truth Eleanor fought for, the legacy she protected. But maybe the legacy isn't the physical place. Maybe it's who we are, what we carry forward." I set the photograph down, turning to face him fully. "I'm scared," I admitted. "Of changing things again. Of disrupting Lily's life. Of stepping into something new when we've barely had time to process everything that's happened." "That's completely understandable," he said gently. "But I'm also tired of making decisions based on fear," I continued. "For 15 years I've been defined by loss, by guilt, by things I couldn't change. Maybe it's time to define myself by something else, by choices I make freely, with hope instead of resignation." A tentative smile crossed his face. "Does that mean?" "It means I need to talk to Lily," I said. "Really talk to her about what she wants, what would make her happy. And I need to figure out practical arrangements for the house and the shop. But if those things can be resolved..." I took a deep breath, surprised by the certainty I felt growing within me. "Then yes, I think we should go to Portland, together, as a family. The relief and joy that transformed his expression made my heart swell. He crossed the room in 2 strides, gathering me into an embrace that felt like coming home in an entirely new way. "I love you," he murmured against my hair. "I've been falling in love with you since that first day in the attic, watching you discover Eleanor's truth. Your strength, your grace under pressure, your devotion to Lily. Everything about you amazes me." I leaned back to look up at him, this man who had entered our lives at the precise moment we needed him most. "I love you too," I said softly, the words feeling both momentous and entirely natural. "Even though your timing is terrible and your proposal lacked any sort of romantic flourish." He laughed, the sound warming the space between us. "I'll work on that part. I promise the actual proposal will be much more impressive." As we stood there in Eleanor's study, surrounded by the tangible remnants of her life, I felt a profound sense of connection, not just to Michael, but to the line of strong women who had preceded me, to Eleanor, who had fought for truth until her last breath, to my mother, who had died trying to protect me, even to the girl I had been before tragedy altered my course, the one who had dreamed of art school and a life filled with creativity and purpose. "We'll need to visit often," I said, thinking aloud. "To tend the garden, check on the house, and Diana can manage the shop day to day, but I'll still want to be involved in the business decisions." "Of course," he agreed readily. "We'll make it work, whatever arrangement feels right to you." "And you're absolutely sure about Lily? About becoming an instant father to a preteen girl with a complicated family history?" His expression grew serious. "Emma, Lily is part of why I fell in love with you. Her resilience, her curiosity, her capacity for joy despite everything she's been through. She's extraordinary. And she's your daughter, which makes her precious to me by extension. Do I know exactly how to be a father? No. But I want to learn, with both of you as my teachers." In that moment, the last of my reservations melted away. Whatever challenges lay ahead, the logistics of maintaining connections to Oak Ridge while building a new life in Portland, the complexities of blending, our lives, the ongoing legal aftermath of Patricia's crimes, we would face them together, not as victims of circumstance, but as architects of our own future. The next morning, I woke early and slipped out to the garden while the house was still quiet. The sun was just beginning to crest the horizon, casting long shadows across Caroline's garden, now restored to its former beauty. The roses gleamed with dew, their fragrance filling the morning air with a sweetness that seemed to embody hope itself. I knelt beside my mother's plaque, now polished and clearly visible against the stone wall. "I'm thinking of making a change, Mom," I said softly, feeling only a little foolish for speaking aloud. "A good change, I think. Something that would make me happy. That would make Lily happy." A gentle breeze stirred the roses, sending their perfume swirling around me. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of peace, of rightness. Whatever Eleanor had believed about the afterlife, and she had never been particularly forthcoming about her spiritual views, I couldn't help but feel that somewhere, somehow, she and my mother were watching over us, approving of the new direction our lives were taking. "We won't forget," I promised, touching the plaque gently. "We'll carry you with us, wherever we go." Behind me, I heard the soft sound of the back door opening, followed by Lily's voice calling quietly, "Mom? Are you out here?" I turned to see her standing on the porch in her pajamas, hair tousled from sleep, Michael a step behind her with mugs of coffee in his hands. The morning light caught them in perfect clarity. My daughter, on the cusp of adolescence, her face alight with the possibilities of the day ahead, and Michael, steady and patient, his gaze finding mine with an expression of such tenderness, it made my heart ache. "Yes," I called back, rising to my feet. "I'm here. I was just saying good morning to the roses." Lily smiled, understanding perfectly. "I do that too sometimes," she confided as I joined them on the porch. "I think Grandma Eleanor can hear us through the flowers she loved." "Maybe she can," I agreed, accepting the coffee Michael offered. "What do you say we have breakfast out here this morning? It's going to be a beautiful day." As we settled around the porch table, the morning unfurling around us in all its summer glory, I felt the last lingering shadows of the past begin to recede. Patricia's confession had closed one chapter of our story, but it was up to us to write the next, with courage, with hope, with the wisdom earned through adversity. Whatever came next, Portland, partnership, a new definition of family, we would face it together, carrying with us the legacy of truth Eleanor had fought so hard to preserve, not as a burden, but as a foundation upon which to build something beautiful and lasting. Something worthy of the sacrifices that had made it possible. Something, at long last, that was truly ours. 6 months had passed since our decision to move to Portland, and autumn had transformed the city into a canvas of crimson and gold. Our apartment overlooked a small park where Lily and I often walked in the evenings, marveling at the urban wildlife that seemed to coexist so peacefully with the bustling city around it. The transition had been smoother than I'd anticipated, though not without its challenges. Lily had adapted to her new school with remarkable resilience, quickly making friends and throwing herself into the advanced art program that had been a major factor in our decision to relocate. I stood at the kitchen window, watching the sunset, paint the sky in shades of pink and orange, so different from the sunsets in Oak Ridge, yet beautiful in their own way. The sound of keys in the lock announced Michael's return from work, and I smiled as he entered, his tie already loosened, briefcase, abandoned by the door as he crossed the room to kiss me. "How was court?" I asked, noting the satisfied gleam in his eyes. "We won," he replied, the simple statement carrying the weight of weeks of preparation. The judge ruled in our client's favor on all counts, full restitution plus damages. I hugged him, genuinely pleased. The case, representing an elderly man who had been defrauded by his caretaker, had resonated deeply with Michael, reminding us both of Eleanor's situation with Patricia. His passion for elder justice had become a focus of his practice at the new firm, a way of honoring what had brought us together in the first place. "Lily will be thrilled," I said. "She's been asking every day if Mr. Jenkins got his house back." Michael smiled, his expression softening at the mention of my daughter, our daughter now, in every way that mattered. "Where is she?" "At her pottery class. Helen's picking her up afterward and bringing her home for dinner." Helen's decision to move to Portland had been unexpected, but welcome. "Too many ghosts in Oak Ridge," she'd explained when she announced her plans to sell her small house and follow us to the city. "And besides, someone needs to teach that child proper gardening techniques. Those city schools only know half the story." She'd found a comfortable apartment in a senior community just 10 minutes from us, close enough to be present in our daily lives but independent enough to maintain her autonomy. "And how was your day?" Michael asked, loosening his tie further as he poured himself a glass of water. "Any progress on the gallery submission?" I nodded, a flutter of nervous excitement in my stomach. "I finished the last piece this morning. The complete series is ready." His face lit up with pride. "Emma, that's fantastic. I told you they'd extend the deadline if you explained the circumstances." The circumstances, a delicate way of referring to the final hearing in Patricia's case 3 weeks earlier. Despite her confession, the legal process had continued, culminating in a formal sentencing that required my presence. Michael had accompanied me back to Oak Ridge, holding my hand as the judge pronounced the sentence: life imprisonment without possibility of parole for the murders of Caroline and Henry. Reynolds, with additional consecutive sentences for the financial crimes and obstruction of justice. Patricia had sat motionless throughout the proceedings, her once immaculate appearance now diminished by prison attire and the absence of her carefully maintained facade. She hadn't looked at me, not once, during the entire hearing. Afterward, as we left the courthouse, I'd felt not triumph but a profound exhaustion, as if the final chapter of a too-long book had finally been closed. The trip had disrupted my work on the gallery submission, a series of paintings exploring themes of memory, inheritance, and redemption that I'd been developing for months. The gallery owner, impressed by my earlier pieces, had graciously extended the deadline, recognizing the importance of the hearing I needed to attend. "When will they make their decision?" Michael asked, bringing me back to the present. 2 weeks, I replied. If they accept the series, the exhibition would open in January. "They'll accept it," he said, with the unwavering confidence that still sometimes caught me off guard. "Your work is extraordinary, Emma. The way you've translated your experience into something so universal, so moving. People respond to that kind of authenticity." His faith in my artistic ability had been a revelation after years of suppressing my creative impulses. With his encouragement and the financial security provided by Eleanor's inheritance, I'd been able to focus on painting full-time since our move. The small successes I'd already achieved, a piece sold at a local art fair, a commission for a corporate lobby, positive responses from gallery owners, felt like stepping stones toward the career I'd abandoned when my mother died. "Diane called this morning," I said, changing the subject slightly. "She's thinking of selling her share of the shop to Diana." Michael raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "Really? I thought she was enjoying being part of the business." "She is, but she's also been offered a teaching position at the community college, business administration. She thinks it might be time for a fresh start, away from all the family associations." After Robert's sentencing, 12 years with possibility of parole after 8, a lenient outcome resulting from his cooperation and Diane's impassioned testimony about Patricia's manipulation, Diane had thrown herself into helping revitalize Reynolds' antiques. Working alongside Diana, she'd brought new energy and ideas to the business, helping to modernize operations while respecting its history and character. Her decision to potentially step away suggested she too was ready to define herself beyond the shadows of the past. "Good for her," Michael said thoughtfully. "It can't be easy, rebuilding a life with those kinds of associations hanging over you." "No," I agreed, thinking of my own journey. "But it's possible, with the right support." He smiled, understanding my unspoken reference to his role in my healing process. Before he could respond, the doorbell rang, announcing Helen and Lily's arrival. Dinner that evening was a joyful affair, with Lily eagerly describing her progress in pottery class. "I'm making something special for Christmas, but it's a surprise, so don't ask questions." And Helen sharing gossip from her most recent phone call with Diana. The shop was thriving under Diana and Diane's joint management, with a new online presence bringing in customers from well beyond Oak Ridge's boundaries. "And how's the house?" I asked, the question I posed during every conversation about our former home. "Beautiful as ever," Helen assured me. "George Jenkins is taking excellent care of the garden, following my instructions to the letter, mind you. And the new security system Diana installed is working perfectly. Everything's ready for your visit next weekend." We had settled into a rhythm of monthly visits to Oak Ridge, maintaining connections to the community while establishing our new life in Portland. The house remained ours, a weekend retreat and living museum of Reynolds family history. I had considered selling it initially, practical considerations warring with emotional attachments. But Lily's distress at the idea had been so genuine that I'd reconsidered. Now, I was grateful for the decision to keep it. The house had become a bridge between past and present, a place where memories lived without overshadowing the future we were building. After dinner, while Helen helped Lily with her homework, a special arrangement they'd established when Helen discovered Lily's struggles with mathematics, Michael and I stepped out onto the small balcony of our apartment. The city lights sparkled below us, a constellation of human activity stretching toward the distant mountains. "I have something for you," Michael said, reaching into his pocket. "I was going to wait until this weekend, when we go back to Oak Ridge, but I don't think I can." He withdrew a small velvet box, and my heart skipped a beat despite having anticipated this moment for months. We had discussed marriage, had agreed it was what we both wanted, but the timing had never seemed quite right with all the adjustments of our move and the ongoing legal proceedings. "Michael," I began, but he shook his head, smiling. "Let me do this properly," he said, dropping to one knee on the narrow balcony. "Emma Reynolds, you walked into my office 18 months ago expecting nothing more than legal assistance, with your grandmother's will. Instead, you found yourself in the middle of a decades-old mystery that would change both our lives forever." He opened the box, revealing a delicate vintage ring with a central sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. "I've fallen in love with your strength, your creativity, your boundless capacity for forgiveness and growth. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" The ring caught the city lights, the sapphire glowing like a captured piece of evening sky. It wasn't ostentatious or flashy. Just like Michael himself, it was elegant, thoughtful, with a quiet beauty that revealed itself more fully the longer you looked. "Yes," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion welling in my chest. "Of course, yes." As he slipped the ring onto my finger, I noticed an inscription inside the band. Leaning closer, I could just make out the words, "Truth redeems. Love heals." It was Eleanor's, he explained, seeing my recognition. Diana found it in a locked drawer at the shop while organizing some of the older inventory. There was a note with it, saying it had belonged to your great-grandmother, then your grandmother. Eleanor had apparently set it aside for you years ago, before everything happened with Patricia. Tears welled in my eyes as I studied the ring, now understanding why it had felt immediately familiar. "I remember this," I said softly. "Grandma used to wear it on special occasions. I always admired it, even as a child." Diana thought, and I agreed, that it was the perfect symbol, a piece of your heritage, your true heritage, moving forward with you into the future. He stood, taking both my hands in his. "If you'd prefer something modern, something without the associations—" "No," I interrupted, squeezing his hands. "It's perfect. Absolutely perfect." We stood together on the balcony for several long moments, the city humming around us, the ring a comfortable weight on my finger, connecting me to generations of Reynolds women while symbolizing the new path I was forging with Michael. "Should we tell Lily and Helen?" he finally asked. I smiled, already imagining my daughter's excitement. "Yes, though I suspect Helen already knows. Diana isn't exactly skilled at keeping secrets." He laughed, the sound warming me from within. "True, but they'll still want to celebrate with us." Inside, we found Lily and Helen at the dining table, math homework apparently forgotten as they bent over a sheet of paper covered with what looked like garden plans. "We're redesigning the rose garden at the house," Lily explained without looking up. "Helen thinks we should add a water feature next spring, and I'm trying to convince her we need a statue of a fairy or something magical." "Something tasteful," Helen clarified, giving me a meaningful look. "Not one of those mass-produced garden gnomes." "Actually," I said, exchanging a glance with Michael, "we have some news that might influence your design decisions." Both looked up, curious. I held out my hand, the sapphire catching the light. Helen's face broke into a knowing smile, while Lily stared for a moment before comprehension dawned. "You're getting married," she exclaimed, leaping from her chair. "To embrace us both." "Finally, I was starting to think you'd never ask her, Michael." "You knew?" he asked, surprised. She rolled her eyes with all the dramatic flair of her 12 years. "Everyone knew. You've been carrying that ring box around for weeks. I saw it in your jacket pocket when I was looking for mint gum last weekend." And why were you looking in my jacket pockets, young lady? He asked, his attempt at sternness undermined by the happiness radiating from him. Because you always have the best gum, she replied matter-of-factly. Anyway, this is perfect. Now we can redesign the garden to include a wedding area. Right, Helen? Helen nodded, her eyes twinkling. I think that's an excellent idea, Lily. Perhaps near the old oak, where the light is particularly beautiful in the late afternoon. And just like that, our engagement became woven into the ongoing story of the Reynolds family home, another layer of meaning added to a place already rich with history and memory. Later that night, after Lily had gone to bed and Helen had returned to her apartment, promising to call Diana first thing in the morning with the news, I found myself drawn to the small studio space we'd created in what was supposed to be a second bedroom. My paintings for the gallery submission were carefully packaged, ready for delivery, but one canvas remained on the easel, a work in progress that wasn't part of the series. It was a portrait of sorts, though not in the traditional sense. Against a background of deep blue, the same shade as the sapphire in my ring, I had begun to paint 3 women: Eleanor, my mother Caroline, and myself. Not as we had been in life, separated by tragedy and deception, but as I imagined we might have been in some alternate, kinder reality. 3 generations of Reynolds women, connected by blood and spirit, their faces bearing similar features yet distinctly individual. I picked up a brush, studying the unfinished canvas. Eleanor's face was nearly complete, captured from a photograph taken in her prime, confident, wise, with the hint of mischief that had always lurked behind her proper exterior. My mother's face was less defined, rendered more from memory and feeling than from photographic reference. My own features were merely sketched, awaiting definition. As I mixed colors on my palette, adding a touch more yellow to capture the warmth in Caroline's smile, I felt a profound sense of connection to these women whose blood ran in my veins. Eleanor's determination, my mother's protective love, these qualities lived on in me, in Lily, creating a continuity that transcended even death. The ring glinted on my finger as I worked, its familiarity already a comfort. How many times had Eleanor worn it while tending her garden, while running the antique shop while raising my mother? Had my great-grandmother worn it during times of joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle? The small circle of gold and stones represented not just my engagement to Michael, but my place in a lineage of women who had loved fiercely, endured greatly, and ultimately triumphed over those who sought to diminish them. I painted late into the night, adding details to my mother's eyes, refining the curve of Eleanor's smile, gradually bringing my own face into sharper focus on the canvas. As the portrait took shape, I realized I was adding a 4th figure, Lily, standing slightly in front of me, her features a blend of my own and those of her father, a man who had drifted out of our lives long before the events that had brought us back to Oak Ridge. When I finally set down my brushes, the painting was still unfinished, but had evolved into something more meaningful than I'd initially envisioned. Not just a portrait of the past, but a vision of continuity, of legacy, of truth redeemed and love healing the wounds of betrayal. Michael found me there as dawn began to break over the city, golden light spilling through the eastern windows. He stood silently beside me, studying the painting with appreciation in his eyes. "It's beautiful," he said simply. "All of you together." "As we should have been," I replied, leaning against him. "As we are now, in some way." He wrapped an arm around my shoulders, understanding without need for further explanation. One of the things I treasured most about our relationship was this: his ability to comprehend the complexities of my healing process, to honor the connections I maintained with those I had lost while helping me build something new. "You should sleep," he said gently. "We're meeting with the wedding planner at 10. I nodded, suddenly aware of my exhaustion. "Just a few hours. Will you wake me by 9? Of course. He kissed my temple. Dream sweet dreams, soon to be Mrs. Bennet. Reynolds Bennet, I corrected with a smile. I'm keeping my name. Adding yours? Even better, he agreed, leading me toward our bedroom. A perfect combination. As I drifted toward sleep, the sapphire ring a comforting presence on my hand, I thought about names and identity, about what we inherit and what we choose. Patricia had tried to erase the Reynolds legacy, to substitute her own narrative for the truth of who we were. She had nearly succeeded, separating me from my grandmother, burdening me with false guilt, stealing years that should have been filled with love and connection. But in the end, truth had prevailed. Eleanor, even from beyond the grave, had ensured that justice would be served and that her granddaughter would reclaim her rightful place in the world. The house on Maple Street, Reynolds Antiques, the garden where generations of my family had found peace, all had returned to their proper stewardship. More importantly, the intangible inheritance, the knowledge of who I was, where I came from, what values had shaped my ancestors, had been restored to me. Now, as I prepared to marry Michael, to formally make Lily his daughter as she was already in her heart, I was building upon that foundation rather than trying to escape a painful past. Our decision to establish our daily lives in Portland while maintaining connections to Oak Ridge represented not a rejection of my heritage, but an evolution of it, honoring the roots while allowing new growth to flourish. When I finally fell asleep, my dreams were indeed sweet, not haunted by the mysteries and betrayals that had shadowed us for so long, but filled with images of the future we were creating together. A wedding beneath the old oak tree in Eleanor's garden. Lily growing into adolescence and beyond, her artistic talents blossoming under the nourishment of a stable, loving home. Michael and I growing old together, perhaps someday sharing the story of how we met with grandchildren who would never know firsthand the pain that had preceded their existence. And running through these dreams like a golden thread was the certainty that Eleanor and my mother were somehow present, their love transcending the boundaries between life and death, their spirits celebrating the healing that had finally come to our family. The weekend visit to Oak Ridge, our first as an officially engaged couple, took on an almost festive atmosphere. Diana had organized a small engagement party at Reynolds' Antiques, inviting the staff who had become like extended family and a few trusted friends from the community. The shop had been transformed for the evening, antique chandeliers casting warm light over displays rearranged to create a reception area, flowers from Eleanor's garden adorning every surface. She would have loved this, Diana told me as we stood near the old roll-top desk that had been my grandfather's. Seeing the shop filled with joy again, celebrating you and Michael. It's exactly what she hoped for when she set everything in motion, with that amended will. I still miss her, I admitted, watching Lily across the room as she proudly showed Helen the pottery bowl she had made at her class, her first completed project deemed worthy of display. There are so many moments I wish she could be part of. She is part of them, Diana said with quiet certainty. Through you, through Lily, through this place and everything it represents. She gestured around the shop, at the carefully curated antiques that told stories of times past. Eleanor understood that objects carry history, emotion, connection. That's why she loved this business so much. It wasn't just about selling beautiful things. It was about preserving the threads that connect generations. I nodded, seeing the truth in her words. Just as the sapphire ring on my finger connected me to my grandmother and great-grandmother, the shop preserved connections to countless families, their heirlooms passing into new hands but carrying their stories forward. Speaking of connections, Diana continued, her expression turning more serious. There's something I've been meaning to give you. A letter Eleanor wrote before she died, with instructions that I should give it to you only when you seem truly settled, truly at peace. From her pocket, she withdrew an envelope, slightly yellowed with age, my name written in Eleanor's distinctive handwriting across the front. "I think now is the right time," she said softly. "With your engagement, with the life you're building in Portland while honoring your roots here, I believe this is what she was waiting for." I took the envelope with trembling fingers, moved by this final message from the grandmother who had fought so hard to protect me even in death. "Thank you for keeping it safe," I managed, my voice thick with emotion, "for knowing when the time was right." Diana squeezed my hand gently. "Eleanor trusted me with many things, but none more important than your happiness. Read it when you're ready. No rush, no pressure." Later that night, after the party had ended and we had returned to the house on Maple Street, after Lily had fallen asleep in her old bedroom and Michael had gone to check the security system one last time, I sat alone in Eleanor's study. Still, Eleanor's in my mind, though I had made it my own during our weekend visits, and carefully opened the envelope Diana had given me. The letter inside was several pages long, written in Eleanor's elegant script that had grown shakier toward the end of her life but remained unmistakably hers. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then Diana has determined that the time is right, that you have found your way through the darkness and into a life of purpose and joy. I can only imagine what path has brought you to this point, what challenges you've faced and overcome since my death. But knowing you, my darling girl, I have faith that you have met each obstacle with the same quiet strength that has always defined you, even when you couldn't see it in yourself. There are many things I regret as I approach the end of my life. I regret the years we lost to Patricia's manipulations, years when we should have been sharing confidences, creating memories, strengthening the bond between us. I regret not seeing through her deceptions sooner, not fighting harder to maintain contact with you. But my greatest regret is that I will not live to see you flourish in the aftermath of the truth being revealed. I have done what I can to ensure justice for your mother and father, to restore to you what rightfully belongs to the Reynolds family. The house, the business, the financial security that should have been yours all along. These tangible things I can return to you. But the intangible losses, the years without your mother's guidance, without your grandfather's wisdom, without my love surrounding you daily, these cannot be reclaimed. And yet, my darling, I believe in your capacity to build something beautiful from the ashes of what was lost. You are Caroline's daughter, Henry's granddaughter, my beloved Emma. In you lives the best of all of us. Caroline's passionate creativity, Henry's steadfast integrity, and perhaps a touch of my own stubborn persistence. These qualities cannot be destroyed by deception or separation. They are your birthright, your inheritance more precious than any property or possession. As you move forward in your life, and I pray it is a long and joyful one, I hope you will remember not just the tragedy that marked our family, but the love that preceded it and ultimately transcended it. Remember your mother's laugh, how it could fill a room with sunshine. Remember your grandfather teaching you to fish in the pond behind the house, his patience never wavering as you tangled line after line. Remember our afternoons in the garden, naming roses and planting bulbs for spring surprises. And remember this, above all, the strength of the Reynolds women has never been in avoiding hardship, but in facing it with courage and emerging not merely intact but enlarged in spirit. You come from a line of women who understood that pain is the price we sometimes pay for love, but who chose love anyway, knowing its value exceeded the cost. I cannot know what shape your life will take after reading this letter. Perhaps you have married, perhaps there are children who carry our blood into future generations. Perhaps you have found success in your art, that talent that showed itself so early and brought you such joy. Perhaps you have forged entirely new paths I cannot envision from the vantage point of my limited time. But I know this: you are loved. You have always been loved, by your mother, by your grandfather, by me. That love doesn't end with our deaths. It continues, a current running through your life, sustaining you even when you cannot feel its presence directly. Live fully, my darling Emma. Create beauty. Seek joy. Forgive, not just others who have wronged you, but yourself for any imagined failures or shortcomings. Know that I am proud of you, that I have always been proud of you, and that nothing could ever diminish the love I hold for you. Until we meet again, in whatever realm awaits us beyond this life, all my love, Grandma Eleanor P.S. The blue roses in the north corner of the garden aren't truly blue, of course. No rose is naturally that color. Your grandfather had them specially treated each year for my birthday because he knew blue was my favorite color. The treatment is harmless and temporary, applied to white roses just as they begin to bloom. The formula is in the garden shed, top shelf, in a box labeled Eleanor's Blues. Perhaps someday you'll continue the tradition, or perhaps you'll let them grow naturally white. Either way, they will bloom, as love blooms even after loss. Tears flowed freely down my cheeks as I finished reading, but they were not the bitter tears of grief I had shed so often in the years after my mother's death. These were healing tears, washing away the last lingering shadows of guilt and uncertainty that had clung to me despite all the progress I had made. Eleanor had always known, that I would find my way back to wholeness, back to joy. Her faith in me, reaching across the boundary between life and death, filled me with a profound sense of peace. I carefully folded the letter and returned it to its envelope, then moved to the window overlooking the garden. Though it was dark outside, I could just make out the shapes of the rose bushes in the moonlight, their silhouettes familiar and comforting. Somewhere among them were the white roses that Henry had transformed into blue ones each year for Eleanor's birthday, a small act of magic performed out of love. "Emma," Michael's voice, gentle with concern. "Are you all right?" I turned to find him in the doorway, his expression a mixture of love and worry. "Yes," I said, surprised to find it was absolutely true. "I'm better than all right." I crossed the room to him, the letter still in my hand. Eleanor left me one last gift. Words I needed to hear, exactly when I needed to hear them. He smiled, drawing me into his arms. "She was quite remarkable, your grandmother. I wish I could have known her better." "You would have liked each other," I said, certain of it. "She valued honesty, integrity, the same qualities I love in you." We stood together in the quiet study, surrounded by the tangible remnants of Eleanor's life. Her books, her desk, the photographs she had cherished, and by the intangible legacy of her love and wisdom. In that moment, the distance between past and present seemed to collapse, the boundaries between those gone and those remaining becoming permeable, fluid. "What did she say?" he asked, nodding toward the letter. "If you want to share it?" I hesitated, not because I wanted to keep Eleanor's words private, but because I was searching for the right way to express their impact. "She reminded me that we're more than the sum of our losses," I finally said. "That love persists beyond separation, beyond even death. That the strength of the Reynolds women has always been in facing hardship with courage and emerging not just intact, but enlarged in spirit." Michael's arms tightened around me, his understanding of the significance of these words evident in his silence. After a moment, he spoke softly against my hair. "She was right, about all of it, especially about you." In the morning, as sunlight streamed through the windows of the house on Maple Street, Lily found me in the garden shed, searching through boxes on the top shelf. "What are you looking for, Mom?" she asked, curious. I smiled down at her from my perch on the stepladder. "A special formula for roses. Something your great-grandfather used to do for Eleanor on her birthday." Her eyes lit up with interest. "What kind of formula? Like a magic potion?" "Something like that," I agreed, finally spotting a dusty wooden box labeled in faded marker, "Eleanor's Blues." A way to make white roses bloom blue, just for a little while. As I climbed down with my treasure, Lily's expression grew thoughtful. Could we do that for our wedding? Make some of the roses blue to remember Grandma Eleanor? The suggestion touched me deeply. Another example of how naturally Lily incorporated the memory of those she had never met into her understanding of our family. I think that would be perfect, I said. A way of having her there with us on the day. And Grandma Caroline, too, Lily added. She would have liked blue roses, right? She would have loved them, I assured her, thinking of my mother's artistic sensibility, her appreciation for the unusual and beautiful, especially knowing they were part of a tradition connecting her parents to her daughter and granddaughter. Together, we carried the box out to the garden, where the morning sun illuminated each petal and leaf with crystalline clarity. The garden Eleanor had tended so lovingly continued to thrive, now under our care, a living testament to the continuity that had survived despite all attempts to sever it. As Lily examined the formula's label with scientific interest, and I made mental notes about which roses to treat for our spring wedding, I felt Eleanor's presence more strongly than ever, not as a ghost or supernatural visitation, but as an enduring influence, a love that had transcended death and deception to guide us home. In the months that followed, as wedding plans progressed and life settled into new patterns, I often returned to the words in Eleanor's final letter. You come from a line of women who understood that pain is the price we sometimes pay for love, but who chose love anyway, knowing its value exceeded the cost. These words became a touchstone for me, a reminder that our capacity to love despite loss, to rebuild after devastation, to choose connection over isolation, these were the true inheritance Eleanor had left me. Not the house, not the business, not the financial security, but the understanding that love, in all its forms, was worth any price. And as I stood beneath the old oak tree on my wedding day, Michael's hands holding mine, Lily beside us with blue roses woven into her hair, I felt the circle complete itself. The mockery at Eleanor's will reading, the painful revelations that followed, the long journey toward justice and healing, all had led to this moment of profound joy and connection. The last box Eleanor had left for us to open hadn't contained documents or evidence or legal papers. It had contained something far more precious, the truth that love endures, that family transcends even death, and that with courage and perseverance, even the deepest wounds can heal, leaving us not diminished but enlarged in spirit, capable of greater love and joy than we had ever imagined possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.